Hi everybody, this is Debbie-Poryes for another free jazz piano lesson. And my last name is spelled P as in piano, O-R-Y-E-S. Easy to find me with a name like that, right? My Hungarian grandmother. Anyway, today we're going to get into melodic improvisation over chord changes. I mentioned that in that last recording I made for on voice leading. And so I made a little chart here. And so when you're taking notes and watching the recording on YouTube, you can take a snapshot of this or picture or pause it and copy it down. So I'm going to tell you what everything's on here. I make a little equation. I have MIOC, which stands for melodic improvisation over chord changes. Melodic improvisation over chord changes equals CT, that's going to be chord tones, PT, that's going to be passing tones, N, that's going to be neighbors, and whatever key you're in. To me, that's kind of it in a nutshell. Here I have the chord tones. For example, if you had a C major 7th chord, you'd have the root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. That would be your chord tones, or even just the triad, which we're going to do today. Or if I had a C dominant 7th chord, I'd have C, E, G, B flat. Those would be my chord tones, and actually we're going to do a little on that today. And the passing tones, we have the diatonic passing tones, which fit in the key that you're in. So the second degree here, the 2, the D, is a passing tone between C and E, between the tonic and the 3rd. And this F, the 4th scale degree, is a passing tone between the E and the G, and so on. And the chromatic passing tones are anytime you just go from one note to another by half step. So if I go from C to D, from the 1 to the 2, then if I have that little C sharp in there, that would be called a chromatic passing tone. It doesn't really matter. What I always say, it doesn't matter what it's called, because there's plenty of controversy about all these things. Never forget that. Don't let anyone push you around. So anyway, if you're just going from one place to another, you're going from this note to that note, and you're passing through some other notes, we call those passing tones, like a little pathway, a little passway. And then the neighbors are defined as any note, half step or whole step, above or below every note. So every note has 4 neighbors. So I made a G here. And so we call the lower neighbors would be F and F sharp. And the upper neighbors would be A and A flat. You can spell those any way you want. It doesn't matter. You can call that G flat, and you can call this, what would it be, G sharp? None of these kinds of things matter at all. It's all about your ear. Never forget that either. So, and we use these neighbors, for hundreds of years, and it's all over bebop and all over 20th century and 19th century and 18th century music. So, take notes off that, make a pause, because I'll be referring to these things. And now I'm going to turn my camera, which I have on a music stand. That's how I do it. I can raise it, I can lower it, and then I can raise and lower this lid. So now you won't be able to see me, but you'll be able to see the piano, which is, of course, the main thing. Okay. So I'm putting this mic in its little mic stand. Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me. So we're going to start with a dominant 7th chord, a C7. And the last lesson we talked about playing the root in 3 and 7. You can play the root in 7 and 3. That's C, E, and B flat, or C, B flat, and E. Or any combination of these things, but just keep the root in there. 1-7 is nice. 1-3 is nice. You can do that too. Sometimes I show people a little voicing, 7 root 3 with the root in the middle. I think that's a nice way to do it because you're still looking at the root. And if you want to use those sort of fancy left-hand voicings that's how I learned they were called left-hand voicings. They call them rootless voicings now, which, I talked about that last time. But they are nice, and so very common would be 3-7-9. That'd be E, B flat, D. Or 7 3, 13. So you can fool around with those too and throw the roots in, you know. And we'll be improvising. So I'm going to improvise a little bit over C7. And it's really nice, by the way. In a way, that's the point I'm making. It's really nice to practice improvising over one chord for a long time at a time. When I was younger, I did this all the time. You know, what kind of chord it was. Maybe it was a more fancy chord with different kinds of nines and this and that. And it's just nice to just let yourself, we call it stretching out, just play over one chord and start to get the lay of the land that way. Okay. All right, so here's C7. So I'm using some of these things, and I want to go over them in a kind of systematic way. I always tell people start with the triad. We did that last lesson. In other words, it doesn't matter what order you play them in. That's the interesting thing about triads. Those things called inversions. The ear, if you play a C here and the ear hears the E, it says, oh, that's a third, you know, or oh, that's a fifth. It doesn't care where you have it. And then you can explore the passing tones. 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. That gives you a lot right there. So I'm just playing around with this figure and this figure. 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. Those are two diatonic passing tones. And then if you want to fool around with the 7th, you have a passing tone there too, the A between G and B flat. Okay, I did a little half step lower neighbor there. I like to think about the 7th actually below the C. It's not that it isn't up there and you can't use it up there, but it's nice to recognize the melodic strength of the 7th underneath the 1. I learned that really listening to Kinda Blue, Miles Davis's solo on All Blues. You should really listen to that. That's like it's such a great example of improvising in so many ways, but a lot of times he just lands on that 7th. And I always loved that sound. So, so you think of the 7th underneath. I often like to give a little pattern for this of the A, which is the upper neighbor, an upper scale tone neighbor, an upper diatonic neighbor to G, and the lower, the B flat, the 7th underneath the C, and add a little passing tone between this upper neighbor and this G, the 6. This is now the 6th, and I'm passing through, and then I'm passing through on my way to the B flat, and I'm going to have my triad in the middle. And then it's nice to practice the neighbors in some little patterns. This is a common one. We define that as the upper scale tone neighbor, the lower half step neighbor. That's the root of this chord. Here's the third of the chord. I have the upper scale tone neighbor, the lower half step neighbor. There's the third of the chord. I go to the 5th. There's the upper scale tone neighbor. There's the lower half step neighbor. And there's the 5th of the chord. And you'll hear that, and people will do it in the middle of a solo. They'll do different. They'll do triplets. And they don't have to be used all together. You can just think of them as 6 events. I have half step under 1, I can use that. I have that scale tone above 1, I can use that. I have that half step under 3, I can use that. I have that scale tone above 3, I can use that. and this half step under the fifth, and this scale tone above the fifth. That's like 6 notes that you can use in relation to those neighbors. So I'll fool around with each one separately. And there's chromatic neighbors, especially above the root and the fifth. Also, we have that half step and this half step. And you'll hear bebop lines do stuff like that all the time. I always think of that one, Woody and You. That's a Dizzy Gillespie tune. So really, with those tools, you really, if that's enough to think about. You don't have to think about too much more. And then if you, whatever key you were in, you could do that, and we'll talk about that another time. But there I am on a chord change, so I could just practice, you know, all my dominant chords. So now I do F7. And just use your ear. Remember, this is music of the ear. Well, I think I'm still recording, but I hope so. Sometimes people say that you have to use these neighbors and passing tones on the offbeats. This is just not true. I don't know where this comes from, but if you do any studying of any of the great jazz players, you will hear those notes not only on what we call weak beats, off beats, but we hear them on strong beats. In classical analysis, we have a name for that, appoggiatura. We've been doing that. Mozart did it, Bach did it, everybody did it. So it's really in our ear. I might go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I mean, there's the F, the upper neighbor to the 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, and 3 and 4 and 1. So I've got that F right smack dab on a strong beat. 4 and 1, 1, 2. I can nail those neighbors and resolve them. So use your ear, trust your ear, and keep listening to the great players. Transcribe little bits here and there, and you will see these things in action in so many ways that make you realize that it's really an infinite language. And I'm going to stop right now because I'm trying to get under 10 minutes so that it's easier to upload to YouTube. Hope you enjoy that and that's helpful to you. And you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can donate to my PayPal if you want to help me stay solvent as a jazz musician. And there's a link on my YouTube channel for that. Okay, hope to see you soon again.